With East Anglia having such a long coastline, it should come as no shock that it's had its share of heroes of the sea over the long centuries, both when it comes to warfare and to the more mundane, but at times equally as hazardous industries that have come from being next to the sea, such as lifeboatmen and fishermen. The subject of today's video would walk a line between two of these worlds, routinely risking his life in the fishing trade in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then to answer his country's call when the dark clouds of the First World War descended, where he would earn two of the highest awards for bravery the country has to give. Thomas Crisp was born on the 28th of April 1876 in the Suffolk coastal town of Lowestoft, the most easterly point in Britain, in Alma Street, and he would be one of 10 children born to William and Mary Ann Crisp. William owned a rather successful boat-building business, making the family richer than many in the town at the time. This allowed them to make sure all their children were educated, while others could possibly afford to send one child to school if they were lucky, with Thomas first being sent to a Baptist school and then to St John's National School close to the waterfront, where he really developed his love for the sea, often missing classes to go and hang around the fishing boats, and the times he did attend class, much of it was spent daydreaming, leading to his father moving him to a new school on London Road, slightly more inland to be away from the distractions. The reason William wanted Thomas to have the best education he could was he planned for his son to follow him into the shipbuilding business, due to its higher rate of pay and better conditions than freezing half to death in the sea as a fisherman. But all his attempts came to nothing. Thomas had made his mind up. He would go to sea. Soon after he left school, he went down to the harbour to join a crew, and would spend 4 years fishing for herring and mackerel, facing long hard hours in the cold North Sea, before moving on to much larger trawler boats, and soon had been raised to third hand on board a fishing smack. After this, possibly wishing for a change of pace, he joined the Merchant Navy, working on an ocean steamer, SS Mobile, sailing between London and New York, eventually becoming the ship's quartermaster. At age 19, while on leave, he met Harriet Elizabeth Alp, the daughter of a fisherman who lived near Beccles, whom he would marry in 1895, and move to 48 Staithe Road in the village of Burr St Peter, 6 miles inland from Lowestoft, and the couple would have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Despite his years of practical experience when it came to working at sea, Thomas lacked any official qualifications, and due to this found it nearly impossible to advance any higher than he was within the Merchant Navy. So he returned to working on the trawlers, where he was able to gain his skipper's certificate. In 1902, he went to work for one of the biggest fishing firms in Lowestoft, run by the Chambers family, where, due to his experience and skills at sea, he was trusted with one of their newest vessels, a wooden ketch, a 2-mast sailing boat, whose mainmast is taller than the mizzen or aft mast, called George Borrow, named after the writer and traveller from Norfolk, who we have covered in the past. Thomas would command the George Borrow for the next 13 years, becoming one of the most respected skippers in the town among the local fishermen and their families. Harriet and the children would move to Lowestoft itself in 1907 to be closer to him, and his eldest son, Thomas Jr., hereby called Tom in the rest of the video to avoid confusion, joined him aged 14 as an apprentice on board in 1913. But times were changing, and the following year the first shots of the First World War were fired, turning the lives of millions upside down. Although, due to his job, Thomas was unaware of the momentous news of the outbreak of the war. He was far out to sea working at the time, and had no communication with anyone on land. He returned with his catch a few days after war broke out, and was somewhat confused by the panic he found, and the local residents who were sure an invasion would come any moment. But of course, it never did. By now, in his late 30s, there was no call for Thomas to join up, and his work was vital enough, maintaining food supplies to the country, for him to carry on without being branded a coward for doing so. As the war gained pace, he and the rest of the crew of the Borrow were among the last people to see the battle cruisers HMS Aboukir, HMS Hogue, and HMS Cressy afloat as they passed them out to sea. A short time later, all 3 were sunk by a single submarine, costing over 1,000 lives. what came to be known as the action of the 22nd of September, and is something we will cover in the future. Bodies would wash up on local beaches and be caught in fishing nets for weeks. Among those who made this rather grim catch was the George Borrow. Despite this new aspect of his job and the added dangers of the war, he carried on fishing on the Borrow until February 1915, when his son, now 16, left to join the Royal Navy, faking his age to 18 to do so. Around this time, the eyes of the German Navy turned on the British fishing fleet, sinking many in an attempt to starve the country, including the George Borrow, sunk by German submarine UB-10 on the 11th of August 1915, off the coast of Cromer in Norfolk. It is unknown if Thomas was on board at the time of the sinking or not. With his boat destroyed, he soon found himself struggling for work, and with a family and a wife who was beginning to fall sick to feed, he took a job in a fish net making factory. The war really hit home for the people of Lowestoft on the 24th of April 1916, when the German Navy bombarded and damaged the town, something we have covered in more detail recently. Please follow the link on screen for this presentation. With his livelihood of 13 years sunk and his hometown shelled and damaged, Thomas realised that it was time to really do something, and in summer 1916 he joined the Royal Navy Reserves, who were looking for men just like him. Given his extensive experience in the local area, he was made the skipper of I'll Try, an armed fishing smack known as Q-ships, former fishing boats that had been transformed into makeshift gunboats. Crewed by around 10 men each, they would work in pairs or small groups, acting like regular fishing vessels to lure in German U-boats, who would come in for an easy kill, only to be attacked by their hidden weapons. He was even able to pull some strings with the Navy itself and have his son moved from his posting in Dover back to Lowestoft in September 1916, although the pair would not serve together until early 1917, with Thomas as skipper and Tom as mate. The father-son duo went into their first combat of the war together on the 1st of February 1917. Along with another Q-ship they were operating, known as Boy Alfred, they spotted a pair of enemy submarines on the surface. Shots were exchanged, and the Q-ships were narrowly missed by torpedoes. They returned fire, sinking a German submarine that saw Thomas earned the Distinguished Service Cross, and recommended for a position on board a larger type of Q-ship. But he was forced to turn the promotion down, due to personal reasons. His wife Harriet was now terminally sick, and due to this, he did not want to spend any more time away from her than he had to. She would pass away on the 12th of June 1917. For their actions in the battle, the rest of the crew were awarded £200 each. Although, after the war, German records were released, suggesting that the submarines were in fact only damaged and driven off rather than sunk that day. In an attempt to keep the Germans guessing on what were the real fishing boats, first the armed decoys, Q-ships were renamed often, leading to I'll Try being renamed to Nelson, and Boy Alfred becoming the Ethel and Millie. Despite the loss of his wife, Crisp carried on until Wednesday, the 15th of August 1917. They were operating further north up the country, off the coast of Lincolnshire, near the Humber estuary. They were out fishing along with the Ethel and Millie. It was 2:30 in the afternoon when they spotted a German U-boat on the surface, out to sea, coming towards them. Crisp ordered his men to get ready and man their guns, probably a QF 3-pounder Hotchkiss gun. And with this came one major problem. The German 88mm deck guns could fire much longer range than the now fairly obsolete Hotchkiss, and fired they most certainly did. Not wishing to waste torpedoes, it was the deck gun that came into action. At about 2:45, the attack began. The first 3 rounds fired at Crisp's vessel went wide, splashing the Nelson with seawater, but the 4th struck her portside bow just below the waterline, and she slowly began to list. Shots 5 and 6 went the same way as 1 to 3. And then shot 7 made the worst impact of all. It hit skipper Thomas Crisp, taking off both his legs and partially disemboweling him, before passing through the decks and out the side of the ship. Despite the catastrophic injuries he had received, Thomas stayed at his post and stayed fully alert. yelling orders to send off a message of their location that they were under attack, using a carrier pigeon known as Red Cock. It flew off, carrying the message. Nelson being attacked by submarine. Skipper killed. Jim Ho Bank, send assistance at once. Next, he made sure the ship's logbooks and codebooks went over to the side and to the bottom of the sea to save them from enemy hands. This done, assisted by his son, he remained in command, instructing his men to carry on firing until they were out of ammunition. By this point, he knew there was nothing that could be done, either for himself or for the Nelson. He ordered the ship to be abandoned, but refused a place in the lifeboat, saying to his son, "Tom, I'm done, throw me overboard," fearing that he would slow them down if he went. But this would be one of his orders that none of the crew were prepared to follow. As the lifeboat was readied and boarded by others, Thomas died of his wounds on the deck of the sinking Nelson, in the arms of his son, smiling as he did. To honour his request, they left him with his command. As the Nelson slipped under the water, so did he. His body was never recovered, but his name would be engraved on the grave of his wife in Lowestoft Cemetery. Thanks to his bravery and quick thinking, all on board the Nelson other than himself had survived, and were picked up after 2 days at sea by HMS Dryot. But the crew of the Ethel and Millie, who at one point had tried to come to her aid, would not be so lucky, and is a topic of much controversy. Survivors of the Nelson claimed they saw them being taken prisoner after the Ethel and Millie were sunk, and were standing on the deck of the U-boat being interrogated by the crew, but none of them would ever be seen again. With rumours rife that they had been left to drown by the German Navy, who submerged with them still on the deck and left them to their fates. But if there is any truth in this, it will probably never be known. There can be little doubt that Thomas Crisp was a very brave man, more than willing to sacrifice himself for the good of the crew. There is some debate on whether or not he would have received his highest award had it not been for events unfolding across the Channel in Belgium. It is no secret that the Victoria Cross has been used to draw attention away from political and military disasters. From the 182 awarded in the 1.5 years of the Indian Mutiny to the 11 Victoria Crosses of Rorke's Drift, following the crushing defeat at Islandwana by the Zulu the same day, and in more recent times of this presentation, the 9 for the first day of the Somme. The month before Thomas' death, a new battle had begun to capture the village of Passchendaele in Belgium, and things were going wrong. Rain had started to fall almost instantly, and with the drainage ditches smashed by artillery fire, the battlefield was soon a sea of mud and deep craters filled with water. Thousands were being killed or wounded every day, with little gain and little good news to tell the public. And now here was this seemingly ready-made hero, a once humble fisherman, who stayed at his post to the last, in the very spirit of Nelson himself. The Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, gave a passionate speech and retelling of the events to the House of Commons on the 29th of October 1917, turning Thomas into an overnight national hero, with his story being retold in papers all over the country for weeks. And the day following the speech, the decision on how to honour him was made. Honours for service in action with enemy submarines. The King has been graciously pleased to approve the award of the following honours, decorations and medals to the officers and men of the service in action with enemy submarines. Posthumous award of the Victoria Cross, Skipper Thomas Crisp, Royal Navy Reserves, 10055 DA, killed in action. The citation for the medal would read, on the 15th of August 1917, the smack Nelson was engaging in fishing when she was attacked with gunfire from an enemy submarine. The gear was let go, and the submarine's fire returned. The submarine's fourth shot went through the port bow just below the waterline, and the seventh shell struck the skipper, partially disemboweling him, and passed to the deck and out through the side of the ship. In spite of the terrible nature of his wound, Skipper Crisp retained consciousness, and his first thought was to send off a message that he was being attacked and giving his position. He continued to command his men until the ammunition was almost exhausted, and the smack was sinking. He refused to be moved into the small boat when the rest of the crew were obliged to abandon the vessel as she sank, his last request being that he might be thrown overboard. Thomas Crisp's Victoria Cross was presented to Tom Crisp by King George V at Buckingham Palace on the 19th of December 1917. It was the 857th to be awarded. The same day, Tom himself was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his part in the action, as well as one other member of the Nelson's crew. On the date of his own marriage in July 1918, Tom would wear both his and his father's medals in tribute to him. He would keep them until the 50th anniversary of the action, when he presented them to Lowestoft Town Council, where they were displayed publicly but are now kept in safekeeping with replicas on public display. The carrier pigeon Red Cock has also gone on to be remembered, working throughout the war and after its death being stuffed and mounted in Lowestoft War Museum for a time, before being moved to a museum in Kensington in London. It should come as no shock that in the Lowestoft area, his name and memorials to him can be found all over. There was a plaque on a house he lived in Stamford Street. In St Margaret's Church, his name appears on the war memorial, and one of the bells, known as the Victoria Cross Bell, is dedicated to him. There is not one, but two roads in the town named after the famous skipper, Crisp Close and Tom Crisp Way. A display of his life can be found at the Royal Navy Patrol Service Museum in the Sparrow's Nest in Lowestoft, and his name appears on the Chatham Naval Memorial in Kent, dedicated to those lost at sea in the First World War, and his name can be found on panel 25, column 3. Sadly, one of the displays to him contained parts of the wreck of the Nelson that was held in Lowestoft Free Library was destroyed in a bombing in the Second World War, and I'm sure there are many others to him that I have missed. Like all Victoria Cross recipients we have covered on this channel, Thomas Crisp was commemorated on the 100 years since his action and death with a memorial stone laid for him that can be found at Lowestoft Naval War Memorial. The service was led by Reverend Michael Asquith, and among those in attendance was David Elford, the Royal Navy Regional Commodore for the East of England, who said of the event, "There is a terrible habit nowadays of overusing the word hero. However, when you listen to the story of Thomas Crisp, 100 years ago on the icy waters, I think that is the only word for it. His selfless act was truly heroic, and it was humbling to be able to be here and remember his sacrifice." Along with local dignitaries and members of the Royal British Legion, there were also several descendants of Skipper Crisp in attendance, including a then 9-year-old great-great-great-grandnephew, also called Thomas. A service was also held at his wife's grave in Lowestoft, partly to commemorate his life, and partly to celebrate the gravestone being renovated from its rather dilapidated state it had become over the years. And I will end this video with a slight amendment on another one. A while ago I made another video on a Lowestoft Victoria Cross recipient, Claude Charles Castleton, who received his while serving with the Anzacs. In that video it may have come across as he was Lowestoft's only Victoria Cross recipient, and this was not true. I was unaware of Thomas Crisp at the time, something I am rather annoyed about because it's an interesting story I wish I'd known for longer. But you may follow the link on screen if you wish to see the presentation of another Lowestoft man during the First World War. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. All of the information and pictures used can be found in the description below. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. This was Thomas Crisp, VC, DSC, from Fisherman to Unlikely War Hero, and this was a little bit of history.